My name is Amelia. I grew up in a small, cozy house that always smelled like fresh bread. My dad ran our family bakery, which he had taken over from his parents. After school, I loved helping him knead the dough, feeling the soft texture under my hands as we worked together. My mom, however, was quite different. She worked as a realtor and was always dressed in sharp suits and high heels. She made more money than my dad, and that often caused tension in our home. One evening, when I was 11, I heard my mom calling from the kitchen. "Amelia, come set the table," she yelled. Back then, I was a skinny, shy girl, more interested in reading books than anything else. I marked my place in the book I was reading and hurried to the kitchen. As I set the table, I couldn't help but overhear my parents arguing again. "It's been another slow month, Tyler," my mom said with frustration in her voice. "When are you going to get it together?" My dad, always calm, replied softly, "Please, Joyce, not in front of Amelia." But Mom didn't care. "She should know what a failure her father is," she snapped. I froze, gripping the edge of the table tightly, trying not to cry. This kind of argument was common in our house. Mom always belittled Dad, while he tried to keep things peaceful. It wasn't just about money. I think Mom felt stuck in a life she didn't want. "Amelia," Mom's sharp voice broke my thoughts. "Where's my wine?" I rushed to pour her a glass, but my hands were shaking, and I accidentally spilled some on the tablecloth. Mom's eyes narrowed as she glared at me. "You useless girl. Can't you do anything right?" Dad quickly stepped in. "It's just a little wine, Joyce. No big deal." But Mom turned her anger on him. "You're too soft on her. No wonder she's growing up to be as pathetic as you." That was too much for me. Tears streaming down my face, I ran to my room and buried my head in my pillow. I loved my dad so much, but I couldn't understand why he put up with the way Mom treated him. I decided the best way to survive in our house was to stay quiet and invisible. The next morning, something felt off. There was no smell of fresh bread from the bakery and no sound of Mom's heels clicking on the floor. I went downstairs and found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, looking pale and defeated. "Where's Mom?" I asked, though I already had a bad feeling. Without saying a word, Dad handed me a note in Mom's handwriting. It read, "Tyler, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving with Anthony. He can give me the life I want. All this small-town nonsense isn't for me. Amelia, don't bother looking for me. You're just dead weight. Tyler, you're a loser, and you've made our daughter one too. Goodbye and good riddance." I stared at the note, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. Mom was gone. She had left us, calling Dad a loser and me useless as her parting words. The months that followed were chaotic and painful. Dad filed for divorce and petitioned to have Mom's parental rights taken away. I remember sitting with him in a cold courthouse, holding his sweaty hand as we waited for Mom to show up. She never did. The adults in the courtroom talked about things like abandonment and unfit parenting. In the end, the judge ruled in Dad's favor. When it was over, Dad squeezed my hand and said softly, "It's done, Amelia. The divorce is final, and your mom's parental rights are gone. It's just you and me now." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Life wasn't easy after that. Dad poured all his energy into the bakery, often working long hours. By the time I was 13, I had taken on most of the responsibilities at home. I would come back from school, finish my homework, and then cook dinner and do laundry. It wasn't the life I imagined, but we managed. 2 years later, when I had just turned 15, everything changed again. One evening, Dad came home looking shocked and sad. "Uncle Ryan passed away," he said quietly, sinking into a chair. I hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry, Dad." After a moment, he pulled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Amelia, you won't believe this. He left me everything. Almost $700,000. I'm his only relative. I don't even know what to do with all of it." But Dad didn't take long to figure it out. He used a portion of the money to invest in the bakery. He upgraded the equipment, added new items to the menu, and gave the shop a fresh, modern look. Within months, our little bakery became the talk of the town. People loved the new atmosphere and the variety of treats we offered. Dad hired more staff, extended the hours, and soon, he opened a second location across town. Our once struggling bakery turned into a thriving business, and for the first time in years, things felt hopeful. When I turned 16, life was completely different from the one I had known as a child. My dad now owned 3 successful bakeries, and we no longer had to worry about money. For the first time, we felt secure and stable. I quit my part-time job after school so I could focus on my studies, something Dad strongly encouraged. Life had become not just easier, but also more joyful. We even took our first real vacation, a 3-week trip to Europe. Over time, my mom became a distant memory. Dad started dating occasionally, but he never seemed serious about anyone. I didn't push him to remarry. We were happy as we were. Our little family of 2 was enough. High school graduation came and went in a whirlwind of celebrations. I can still remember the moment we tossed our caps into the air and hugged our friends. I had worked hard, and it all paid off. I got accepted to State University, where I planned to study finance. The morning I was about to leave for college, Dad handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "Open it," he said, smiling. Inside, I found a key. I looked up at him, confused. "What's this for?" "It's your graduation gift," he explained. "It's an apartment near campus. You won't have to worry about dorms or paying rent." I stared at him in shock. "Dad, I can't accept this. It's too much." But he just waved off my objections. "You've earned it, Amelia. Now go make me proud." College flew by, in what felt like a blur. I was determined to make the most of the opportunity Dad had given me, so I focused hard on my studies. When I wasn't in class or buried in textbooks, I interned at local financial firms to get real-world experience. By the time I graduated, I already had a job lined up as a junior financial analyst. On my first day at work, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, straightening my blazer. "You've got this, Amelia," I told my reflection. "Make Dad proud." The job was challenging, but I loved every minute of it. I worked hard, and every bonus or raise I earned went straight into savings or investments. I could still hear Dad's advice in my mind. "Money makes money, Amelia. Be smart with it." Years passed, and by the time I turned 33, my investments had grown significantly. I owned 3 additional apartments on top of the one I lived in, and the rental income provided a steady financial cushion. Life was good, stable, successful, and peaceful. But then, everything changed with one phone call. "Amelia," Dad's voice came through the line, strained and serious. "Can you come over? I need to talk to you." Worry knotted my stomach as I rushed to his house. When I arrived, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. "What's wrong, Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. He took a deep breath. "It's cancer, honey. Stage 4 pancreatic." The world seemed to tilt around me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This has to be a mistake." But it wasn't. The next year was the hardest of my life. We faced countless doctor's appointments, treatments, and ups and downs. I spent every free moment with Dad, either at the hospital or at home, trying to make things as comfortable as possible. I even made his favorite cheese soup, though there were days when he was too sick to eat it. One crisp autumn day, I found him sitting in his favorite chair, looking thoughtful. "We need to talk, Amelia," he said, patting the seat next to him. I sat down, already dreading what he was about to say. "The doctors told me I have about 5 months left," he said gently. "No," I interrupted, tears filling my eyes. "They're wrong. We'll get a second opinion." "Amelia," he said, reaching for my hand, "it's okay. I've made peace with it. But there's something I need to do. I'm selling the bakeries, and everything will go to you. You'll be set for life." I pulled my hand away, wiping my tears. "I don't want your money, Dad. I want you." He gave me a soft, sad smile. "I know, sweetheart. But this is my way of taking care of you, even when I'm gone." The next 6 months were a mix of bittersweet moments. We talked more than ever about everything and nothing. I memorized every detail about him. The lines on his face, the sound of his laugh, and the faint smell of sugar and flour that always seemed to cling to him. Then one quiet Sunday morning, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of tears and goodbyes. Afterward, I sat alone in his empty house, clutching his favorite apron like it was a lifeline. The lawyer had already come by with the paperwork. As Dad promised, he left everything to me. I used the money from the bakeries to buy 3 more apartments. It felt like the right thing to do, like I was continuing his legacy, building something that would last. A year after Dad passed, I had finally started to find my balance again. Work kept me busy, and managing my rental properties gave me a sense of purpose. I was settling into a new normal, or so I thought. Then came another phone call that turned my world upside down. "Amelia," a familiar voice said. "It's your mother. I'm back in town, and I'd like to see you if you're willing." My mind raced. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately and shut the door on the woman who had abandoned us. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the little girl who had once loved her mom, felt curious. After a long pause, I finally replied, "Okay." When I agreed to meet my mom, I wasn't sure how I felt. Part of me was curious, but another part was nervous. Still, I found myself saying, "Let's meet at Don Jose's Mexican restaurant tomorrow at noon." The next day, I arrived early. My stomach was in knots as I sat at the table, waiting. At exactly noon, I saw her walk in. She looked older, of course, but still elegant, just as I remembered. However, she wasn't alone. Behind her was a young girl, maybe around 17 years old. Mom spotted me and hurried over, her face lighting up. "Amelia, darling, you look wonderful," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. Then she motioned to the girl. "This is Abigail, your sister." Her words hit me like a brick. "My sister?" I stared at Abigail, trying to process this shocking revelation. She looked down at her hands, clearly uncomfortable. We sat down and Mom began explaining everything. She told me how her lover, Anthony, had left her shortly after Abigail was born. She talked about how hard life had been, how she had struggled to make ends meet, and how she finally decided to come back to her hometown to start over. Then, she hesitated, her voice turning hopeful. "I heard you have rental properties," she said carefully. I was wondering if maybe, her voice trailed off, but I knew exactly what she was asking. I looked at Abigail. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. She seemed shy and uncomfortable, and I felt a pang of sympathy. I thought about Dad and how he always taught me to be kind, even when it was difficult. I also thought about the scared little girl I used to be, wishing for my mom to come back. Finally, I heard myself say, "Okay, I have an apartment that just opened up. You can stay there." Mom's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. We'll pay rent, of course." I raised my hand to stop her. "No rent," I said. "Just pay for the utilities for now." As we sorted out the details, I couldn't help but glance at Abigail again. She looked so young and out of place. I remembered being her age, feeling lost and alone when Mom left. Trying to break the awkwardness, I asked, "So, Abigail, are you a junior in high school?" She nodded and finally looked up at me. "Yeah, it's weird starting at a new school for senior year." "I bet it is," I said, feeling another wave of sympathy. "Listen, if you ever need help with school or just someone to talk to, I'm here, okay?" Abigail gave me a small smile. "Thanks. That means a lot." As we left the restaurant, Mom hugged me again. "You're an angel, Amelia. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I hope we can start fresh." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to get much more complicated. For better or worse, my mom was back, and I had a sister. Only time would tell what that meant for all of us. The months after Mom and Abigail moved back were strange. Mom quickly found work as a realtor, slipping back into her old life as if she had never left. Abigail enrolled in the local high school to finish her senior year. I kept my distance, unsure how to navigate this new family dynamic. Every now and then, Mom would call or stop by. "Amelia, darling, thank you again for the apartment," she'd say, smiling warmly. "You've been such a blessing." Her endless gratitude made me uncomfortable. "It's fine, Mom. I'm glad I could help," I'd reply, trying to keep the conversations short. Abigail and I, however, started to develop a cautious friendship. She'd ask for help with her math homework, or we'd talk about her college plans. It was nice, in a way, having a sister. But there was always a barrier between us, the weight of all the years we had missed. Then, Abigail's graduation day arrived. I sat at the back of the auditorium and watched as she accepted her diploma. I noticed Mom beaming with pride, and for a brief moment, I wondered what life might have been like if she had never left us. The very next day, Mom showed up at my door unannounced. Her face was red, and her eyes blazed with anger. "We need to talk," she snapped, pushing past me into the living room. I followed her, confused. "What's going on?" She spun around to face me. "Don't play dumb. I know about the apartments, Amelia. All 4 of them." My stomach dropped. "What about them?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "You've been hiding this from us," she shouted. Living the high life while Abigail and I were scraping by. I felt my temper rising. "Excuse me? You're living rent-free in one of those apartments. Isn't that enough?" "It's not," she spat. "Half of those properties should be mine. I'm your mother." I couldn't help it, I laughed. It was so ridiculous. "You can't be serious," I said. "You gave up any claim to my life or my things when you abandoned us, remember? No parental rights. No child support." Her tone suddenly softened and she pleaded, "Amelia, please. Think about Abigail. She needs money for college. If you just sold one apartment." "Absolutely not," I interrupted, my voice firm. I cut her off before she could finish. "Abigail's education is not my responsibility." Mom's face turned red with anger. "How can you be so selfish?" she wailed. "After everything I've done for you." That was the last straw. I stared at her in disbelief. "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Are you talking about abandoning me when I was a child? Calling me useless in your goodbye note? Or maybe you mean living rent-free in my apartment for months and then demanding more?" Mom flinched as though I had slapped her. For a moment, she stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. How could she? After everything I had endured because of her, how could she try to guilt me like that? I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Deep down, I'd known letting her back into my life was a risk, but I had hoped. Well, I wasn't even sure what I'd hoped for. As my anger began to fade, it was replaced by a deep sadness. The woman who was supposed to be my mother, my protector, and my support was nothing more than a stranger. A stranger who only seemed to want to use me. And Abigail? What about her? She was just a teenager, stuck in the middle of all this. I didn't know what to do about her. 3 weeks later, I was at my usual coffee shop, waiting for my order, when I noticed the barista giving me strange looks. I didn't think much of it until I overheard a snippet of conversation from a nearby table. Can you believe it? Charging her own mother rent when she has all those apartments. I froze. Were they talking about me? Over the next few days, I caught more whispers, more side glances. It seemed Mom had been busy spreading her twisted version of the story to anyone who would listen. Then came the Twitter post. I saw it during my lunch break and almost choked on my sandwich. It read, "My daughter Amelia has 5 apartments she rents out, making a fortune, but she refuses to help with her sister's college. She's forcing me to pay outrageous rent when I can barely make ends meet. I'm heartbroken that my own child could be so greedy and selfish." The comments were brutal, each one like a knife to my heart. How could she do that to her own mother? What a horrible person. Ungrateful brat. Friends, relatives, even old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years, jumped on the bandwagon. Not one of them seemed to remember, or care, that this was the same woman who had abandoned me as a child. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my boss called me into his office. "Amelia," he said, his face serious. "We need to talk about this situation with your mother. It's starting to affect the company's reputation. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sir, I can explain. He held up a hand to stop me. I'm not asking for details, but I need you to resolve this quickly and quietly. We can't have this kind of drama associated with our firm. Do you understand? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Back at my desk, I saw an email notification about unpaid utilities for Mom's apartment. Of course. With shaky hands, I called her. What do you want? She snapped when she picked up. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, there are unpaid utility bills for your apartment. We agreed that you'd cover those, remember? She scoffed. Oh, please. You're making so much money from those apartments. You can afford to pay a few bills. That's not the point, I said, my patience wearing thin. We had an agreement. An agreement, she shot back, her voice cold. Like the agreement that you'd help your family? What good did that do us? I sat there, holding the phone, feeling my world crumble. I had tried to be kind, tried to be generous, and this was my reward. With a heavy heart, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Miss Sophia, a calm and professional attorney, looked over my case. You have every right to evict your mother, she said. She has no lease, pays no rent, and you've given her plenty of notice. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. What do I need to do? She slid a document across the desk toward me. This is an official eviction notice. Serve it to her. I stared at the paper for a long moment before picking it up. It felt heavy in my hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. I had spent years trying to rebuild my life after Mom left. Letting her back in had been a mistake, but this time I was taking control. It was time to move on, even if it meant letting go of the mother I had always wished she could be. The lawyer had been clear. If she doesn't comply, we can take legal action. With the eviction notice in hand, I drove to Mom's apartment, technically my apartment. My hands trembled as I knocked on the door. When Mom opened it, her face twisted into an annoyed scowl. Oh, it's you, she said. Have you finally come to your senses about selling an apartment for Abigail's college? Abigail's already picked her school, and tuition is due next month. Her entitlement made my shock quickly turn to anger. Are you serious? After everything you've done, you're still making demands? Don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. It's the least you can do for family. That was the breaking point. Without a word, I handed her the eviction notice. Here, you have 30 days to leave. Mom's face went pale as she stared at the paper. Then, without warning, she exploded. You ungrateful little brat, she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. After everything I've done for you, I stood my ground. Everything you've done? I said, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. Do you mean abandoning me when I was 12? Spreading lies about me to anyone who would listen? Or maybe you're talking about living rent-free in my apartment while refusing to pay even the utility bills. Her face darkened with rage, and suddenly, she lunged forward, grabbing my shirt. You're nothing, she spat, her voice venomous. Do you hear me? Nothing but a selfish, heartless. I yanked myself free, stumbling back. That's it, I said, fumbling for my phone. I'm calling the police. Her eyes widened, but she didn't stop shouting. Her words grew more vicious, each one cutting deeper than the last. By the time the police arrived, I was trembling, tears streaming down my face. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, showing them the eviction notice. One officer turned to Mom. Ma'am, he said firmly, I suggest you calm down and discuss this civilly with your daughter. Mom sneered. Civilly with her? She's trying to throw us out on the street. The other officer spoke to me. Miss Sophia, legally, this is a civil matter. We can't forcibly remove her without a court order. You'll need to pursue this through the courts, if necessary. I nodded, feeling defeated as they left. Mom's smug expression made my blood boil. You won't do it, she taunted, crossing her arms. You don't have the guts to take your own mother to court. I stared at her, my anger hardening into resolve. Watch me, I said, my voice steady. Before she could respond, I turned and walked away. As I reached my car, I heard the door slam behind me. The day of the court hearing arrived. My stomach churned as I walked into the courtroom. Mom and Abigail were already there. Mom's eyes were red and puffy, and Abigail looked like she wanted to disappear. The hearing began, and Mom put on quite a performance. "Your Honor," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "My daughter has turned so cold-hearted. She's trying to throw her own mother and sister out on the streets after everything I've done for her." I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. Then my lawyer stood up, his voice steady and confident. "Your Honor, I'd like to present some evidence that tells a very different story." He laid out the facts: Mom's abandonment when I was 12, the termination of her parental rights, and her failure to pay child support. He showed the judge the rent-free arrangement I had provided and the unpaid utility bills. But he wasn't done. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Sophia is not in the dire financial situation she claims." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Mrs. Sophia owns an apartment in another city," my lawyer explained, left to her by a former partner. "She currently rents it out for a substantial monthly income." The courtroom fell silent. The judge turned to Mom, his expression stern. "Is this true, Mrs. Sophia?" Mom's face went pale. She opened and closed her mouth a few times before finally whispering, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's voice was cold as he delivered his decision. "This court grants the eviction. Furthermore, Mrs. Sophia will pay back rent for the months she stayed in the apartment rent-free. Mrs. Sophia, your actions are truly unacceptable. This case is closed." The gavel came down with a loud bang, echoing through the courtroom. It was over. As we left the courtroom, I saw Abigail standing to the side, looking lost and confused. My heart ached for her. None of this was her fault. I walked over to her, ignoring Mom's glare. "Abigail," I said gently, "I'm sorry it came to this. If you ever need real help, you can still reach out to me, okay?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I didn't know." I gave her a sad smile. "It's okay." I walked away, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Mom and Abigail moved out of the apartment. I heard through the grapevine that they had gone to live in Mom's other property. I didn't reach out to them, and they didn't contact me either. Standing in the now empty apartment, I let the memories of the past few months wash over me. The hope I'd felt when Mom came back, the pain of her betrayal, the stress of the court case. But beneath it all, I felt something new: freedom. For the first time in years, I could finally move forward,